welcome and good afternoon to Fire Engineering's Humpday Hangout. I'm PJ Norwood, filling in the role for both Frank Ricci and myself tonight. Frank is stuck in some traffic. He'll hopefully be joining us shortly. We are pre-recording our show today, and it's January 9th of 2025. It's our first show of 2025. But today is quite significant across the country for many reasons. So before we introduce our esteemed guest, I just want to discuss some things that are going on in the world today. We must recognize the acts of heroism, the tragic loss of life in California. Our thoughts and prayers are with our brothers and sisters who are fighting a massive conflagration. This is well beyond a wildfire. We are talking about, structure-to-structure conflagrations, complete devastation of entire communities. So right now, you listen to the media, there's lots of fingers being pointed, but right now it's the time to support our brothers and sisters, pray for those who have lost their lives, and really pray for our brothers and sisters who are out there on the front lines fighting this devastation, who have lost their communities, and they may be struggling, with their families who have had to evacuate. So right now is uneasy times in California, and our thoughts and prayers are definitely with them. Also today, we must take a minute to remember the 39th president, Jimmy Carter, for his contributions as president, as well as his humanitarian work after his term. He was an inspiration to many. Now, I know with all leaders, we'll either love them, and there's going to be some that dislike them. But at times like this, it's important to remember the good work that he's done for the country and for many people across the country after his term was over. So our thoughts and prayers are with his family today as he lies in state. Tonight's show is going to be incredible. Frank and I tried to get this show going last month. We had some technical issues, and it was around the holiday, and it was such an important topic. We decided that we were going to push it off a month when we could really dedicate the time and the effort. We have Congressman Curt Weldon with us tonight, who literally grew up involved in the fire disaster operations. Now, he even rose to the rank of fire chief in his Coast Fire Department, but he had to resign shortly after because he was elected into mayor of his community. He served as the first volunteer administrator of the Delaware County Fire Academy. In 1987, he was first elected to the U.S. Congress. He championed maritime and port security. Curt conceived, organized, and chaired the Congressional Fire and EMS Disaster Caucus for 20 years as America's honorary fire chief. Beginning in 87, when he was first elected to Congress, the things that he championed and the important topics that he took on, we still benefit for today. So this wasn't a congressman who did his time starting in 87 and, he left. The legacy that he created still benefits each and every one of us today. Since leaving Congress, Curt conceived and organized many things, including One World Life, modeled after his leadership. We're going to show you a video, and Mark, who always runs our shows for us in the background, is going to play a video that tells so much more than what I could by reading his bio. And we're going to put Curt's bio up with this show as a PDF so you can really look in the details and dive into the weeds of all he has done for the fire service. So after this video, we'll get into some great conversation with the good congressman. Mark, go right ahead.
Good evening to all of you. In 1989, I had the honor of addressing this audience at the first annual National Fire and Emergency Services Dinner. I can recall looking out at the audience and seeing over 2,000 fire service leaders. It was an impressive sight, to say the least. And now, as President of the United States, I naturally assumed that the audience was there to hear me speak. But the following year, you packed the ballroom again, as you've done year after year. Why? Not so much to hear from presidents or vice presidents, but to hear from your leader of the past 20 years, Curt Weldon. You often heard Curt speak of the fire service as the sleeping giant. When I was president, if it appeared that I wasn't giving proper attention to your issues, I could always be assured of a phone call from Curt. I am sure the other presidents would all say the same. To his credit, the fire service was never a partisan issue. It was a personal issue, based on his own experience as a volunteer firefighter. He's the reason why both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue have heard the fire service's voice and answered so many of your calls. He's the reason why you, the Fire and Emergency Services, was awakened 20 years ago and has become such a political force in our nation's capital. It's the goal of every political leader who is blessed with the opportunity to serve the public to leave behind a legacy, a legacy that in some way makes our nation stronger, better, and safer. Curt, you've done just that through your dedication and your commitment to our nation's 1 million first responders. So on behalf of Barbara and myself, thank you for your 20 years of incredible service to this great nation, and best wishes as you begin a new chapter in your life. Thank you, and may God bless America.
Well, you can't ask for a better endorsement than that. Congressman, welcome to the show again. Happy New Year.
It's great to be with you, and Happy New Year to you. And I want to second your accolades for the California firefighters and the great job they're doing under impossible circumstances, and also your acknowledgement of the outstanding leadership of Jimmy Carter. I never met the man, but he was an outstanding leader who dedicated his life not just as president, but went on to do so much for people at risk for his whole life up until he died. Just a year or so ago, he was still involved with Habitat for Humanity and other nonprofit groups. So it's an honor to recognize him, and I think he's symbolic of what firefighters are all about. You know, as I said frequently and throughout the country in all 50 states and around the world, firefighters are not driven by power or money. They're driven by desire to help other people, most of whom they've never met. And if you look at the power in America and around the world, it's really not in our capitals, and it's not in our banks or our financial systems or our sports arenas. It's really the men and women who make up the fire and EMS, because they're the people that local folks respect. And that's why every poll shows that 98% support of the public for firefighters and EMS. And I'm proud to call that my most proud, the proudest group that I have that I'm a part of is my role with the fire service.
You know, and what first comes to my mind, Congressman, is I look forward to our law enforcement partners increasing that percentage. You know, it's unfortunate for what the law enforcement does every day so we can all sleep comfortable at night, but they don't get the same respect, because when they go to a call, somebody's not going to be happy. Well, us, EMS, when we respond, we're looked at as the heroes who are always helping, but our law enforcement, you know, partners are as well. But I appreciate you bringing that up. And, you know, our brothers and sisters are struggling right now across the country in many places, not just California. And that's nothing new. You know, you've been a champion for the fire service since long before you started in Congress in 1987. If you could tell us a little bit about your fire service career and the things that, you know, you experienced before Congress, because that will kind of tee up the really important part of the conversation I'm looking forward to getting to, of what your opinion and beliefs are and hopes for the upcoming administration and President-elect Trump on the priorities of the fire service.
Well, I grew up in a fire service family, and the youngest of 9 in a poor family in Pennsylvania. I actually grew up in a town next to where Joe Biden grew up. He grew up in Claymont, Delaware. I grew up in Marksville, Pennsylvania. My father was a firefighter and took pride that he was the chief engineer of our fire company all during his career. He never wanted to rise above that. He never went to high school, but he was the smartest man I ever met. He had common sense and moral decency. And my 6 older brothers all became firefighters. My sisters were involved in the Ladies Auxiliary. Back then, they weren't active firefighters. So I literally grew up in the fire station with my dad and learned the basic lessons of life in the firehouse: electricity, working on trucks, basically interaction with other people, and motivation all took place in the firehouse. And when I became old enough to become back then a member, you couldn't be until you're 18, I actively joined the company and took all the classes I could and went to college. I was the first of the 9 to go to college, become a teacher. But I went back and got a degree in fire protection in the evenings after my undergrad program while teaching school. And as you pointed out, I organized and ran the first countywide fire training program for 80 fire companies, both paid and volunteer, in suburban Philadelphia. And my hometown was a unique community because it's one of the largest ports on the East Coast, with 2 major refineries. And in 1975, actually 50 years ago this month, I was in my 20s, and I was doing report cards at 12:30 in the morning, and the whole house shook. I looked out the back window, and I saw nothing but fire in what was then the British Petroleum Refinery. I got in my car and drove to the firehouse, and on the way down, I got the call that it was a ship on fire at the British Petroleum dock. That fire was the largest fire in America in 1975. A chemical-carrying tanker, the Agram Queenie, had made a U-turn in the Delaware River from Paulsboro, New Jersey, to head upstream to Philadelphia. The river's about a mile wide. And the captain of the ship and the port captain on board got in an argument over who was in control, and the bow thrusters on the front of the ship weren't working. So they lost control of the ship, and this 700-foot-long chemical-carrying tanker rammed the docked oil tanker, the Corinthos, offloading 300,000 barrels of Algerian crude at the BP refinery. Incinerated the ship immediately, instantly killed 28 crew members on board the Corinthos, including the family, his wife, and his kids, who had come over on a trip with their father and husband, and one crew member of the Queenie. And our goal when we arrived down at the foot of the Market Street was basically to try to contain the fire, because we could not get out onto the ship itself. The pier was fully involved, and we had no maritime fire protection. And because the plane had been working on their water system, we weren't able to connect the hydrants, so we had to, and we couldn't draft because the tide was low and there was no area to draft from. So we had to lay lines 1,000 feet away and bring in the water lines 2.5 inch at that time, 3 inch, and set up deluge guns all along the waterfront to keep the fire out on the ship. And it was like a war zone. I mean, there were rivets all over the place, and flames were 200 and 300 feet in the air. Body parts all over the place. It had been blown, a torso had been blown to the side. It was just a nightmare. And that was my first big fire besides the other refinery fires we had. So I wrote a book about that with my two colleagues who had been town fire chiefs, Bucky Collins and Bobby Sides. That book was called The Corinthos Disaster. And ironically, that year I was supposed to give a workshop at FDIC. Back then it was in Nashville. And so I said, yeah, I'll come down and do it. I'm a young 20-some-year-old assistant chief. Yeah, get a chance to speak at FDIC. So I get out, and their keynote speaker backed out. So Eddie McCormick, I didn't know it at the time, but Big Ed McCormick came to me and said, hey, Mr. Weldon, Chief Weldon, can you give us the keynote speech? I said, sure. So I gave the keynote speech at FDIC in 1975. Man, I don't know how I can't even imagine that. And I talked about the Corinthos. And then I was asked by my congressman at the time, Democrat Bob Egger, to testify before Congress. So I testified before the House Energy and Commerce Committee on Maritime Fire Safety and talked about the need for a better set of standards for inland water systems on large tankers to prevent and to deal with the kind of incident that we had. So from that experience, I became the mayor and then went on to county council for the county, suburban Philadelphia County of 600,000. And then I took on and ran against that guy who would have me testify before Congress. And I lost the first time by 400 votes out of 241,000. But the next time around, all the others were landslides. And when I got to Congress, I said, there's one thing I'm going to focus on that I have that no other member has. And that is I'm a firefighter. So I was there with Ted Kennedy and Jim Bunning, who was an all-star pitcher for the Phillies, and Fred Grandy, who was a star on Love Boat as Gopher, all these big names. And there I am, Tom McMillan, pro basketball player. And so I don't have any of that, but I'm a firefighter. And they all have fire departments, and they all need to understand the power of these people. So I said in my first term, I'm going to organize the firefighters in the country because they're not getting respect. Back then, Ronald Reagan was in his last 2 years. The Fire Academy was non-existent. We were spending about $20 million a year total for the fire service. And at that time, the police were getting $4 billion a year, and they're all local. And I said, wait a minute. We lose 120 police officers each year in the line of duty, but we lose 120 firefighters each year in the line of duty. There are no volunteer police officers, and yet 85% of the firefighters are volunteers. So I said, we got to change this. So we organized a caucus. That was in 1987. And the caucus is still in place today. It's still the largest in the Congress. And then another surprising thing happened. I'm in my office in the first term on the Longworth building, and it's 7 o'clock at night. I'm working late. I had one staffer in the outer office, and I smelled smoke. So I run out in the hallway, and I look up, and the speaker's office is on fire in the corner, Speaker Jim Wright. So I said to John, call the alarm, and there's a fire in the speaker's office. I'm going to go up and make sure all the staff's out, because sometimes they work late at night. I felt the door. There's no heat right there, so I knew the fire was back inside the suite. I kicked the door open, got down on my hands and knees, and I did what any of you all would do. I crawled in to make sure that there was no one in the suite. if they were to get them out. There were no people in there. The smoke was billowing down from the ceiling. So I yelled to my staffer. I said, John, go get me some portable fire extinguishers from the host stations. He came back with 5. I grabbed them all. I took them in. 3 of them weren't charged. So I said, John, go back to that host station where you were. Give me the 1.5 inch pre-connect. Bring me the nozzle. And when I yell to you, turn the valve to turn the 1.5 inch on so I can control this. The fire was in the kitchen until the fire department arrived because it was raging. So John comes back and yells, Curt, there's no hose in the host station. Well, there's not much I can do here. So I backed out of the speaker's office, shut the door. And by this time, the smoke was billowing down the hallways. I mean, it was really thick. And members of Congress and staffers were crying and running through the hallways. And the Capitol Hill police were running through the hallways shouting, fire, get out. So I stopped one. I said, are there no sprinklers here? He said, no. I said, what about detectors? No. I said, well, pull the alarm. And he said to me, Congressman, there's no alarm system in this building. Now, I was one of 435 House members, one of 535 elected officials making the laws for our country who were assigned to work in multi-story office buildings that were in violation of Life Safety Code 101 and every building and fire code in America. And so here I was in a 7-story building above ground, 4 stories below ground, with no alarm system, no automatic recall of elevators, no enclosed stair towers, no control of fire loading, and people running through the hallways yelling fire. And I said, boy, we got a problem here. And that was when I learned my first lesson about Washington. It doesn't work by logic. You can't rely on the government to do what's logical. And so I went to my small apartment that night. I was all sooty and dirty, and I got a call from the speaker's office, his chief of staff. I didn't know the speaker at all. I was Republican. He's a Democrat. And the chief of staff says, Congressman Weldon, the speaker wanted me to call you and thank you for what you did. He said, I said, that's no problem. I'm happy to do it. I'm glad nobody got hurt, although the damage was severe. And by the way, Chief Alfred, the chief of D.C. Fire Department, had arrived. When he came into the building, I said, Chief, you've got a working fire on the 2nd floor. You're going to have to lay lines in. I said, the kitchen's fully involved. I said, but I'm sure you're pre-planning these buildings. And the chief of D.C. said to me, Congressman, we've never been allowed to pre-plan these buildings. Never. So I got a call that night, and the speaker's chief of staff said that you're going to be deluged with the media tomorrow. I said, well, okay, I'll be glad to answer questions. He said, but you're not going to blame the speaker, are you? I said, no, why would I blame the speaker? He didn't set the fire. I said, but you got to do something about these buildings. I said, these buildings are fire traps. Nobody should be allowed in these buildings, let alone members of Congress. He said, Congressman, the speaker will do whatever you want. So that night and early the next morning, I had my staff prepare what's called a privilege resolution. A privilege resolution takes precedence over all other House action because it affects the life, safety, and welfare of the members. And I got up, first member, freshman member, speaker recognized me, says, for what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise? And I said, I'm here to offer a privilege resolution. And he said, I know what the gentleman's offering, and I want him to know I thank him, and I accept the resolution, and it will pass unanimously. It was a resolution to create a 4-person panel to make recommendations to retrofit every building on Capitol Hill, including the Capitol building. It passed, and as a result of that, every office building and the Capitol itself were retrofitted with sprinklers, detectors, manual and pull alarm systems, automatic recall of elevators, all the requirements of the codes that all of us have to operate around the country that weren't being followed by our leaders in Washington. And it led me to tell the story to the firefighters of America. You can't depend upon Congress and the government to do what's logical. You've got to understand the process. You've got to make the system work. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. So the Fire Caucus was born. Jim Wright became one of my biggest supporters. His close friend from the Fort Worth Fire Department was Mason Langford. Mason was my guy with the speaker. And Bob Michael was the Republican leader. And it was nothing but growth and success. And then about 10 years later, I said, we've passed some of this minor legislation, but there's no grant program for firefighters. We're giving all this money to police. I'm a big supporter of police. But why do they get $4 billion a year when they're a local operation? And firefighters are local. That doesn't make sense. So my friend said, well, let's do legislation. So I wrote a bill with Bill Pascrell, who just passed away a couple of years ago. And the bill was to create grants. And they said, how much are you going to ask for, Kurt? I said, $1 billion. They said, oh, come on, you're kidding. Never happened. I said, we're going to ask. So he wrote the bill in 2000. And Clinton was the president. Clinton didn't like me because I had embarrassed him on some foreign policy stuff and defense stuff. So he told Pascrell, we're not passing that legislation sponsored by Weldon. I didn't need Clinton. I had the firefighters behind me. So as a senior member of the Defense Committee, I attached the fire grant program to the defense bill. So when Clinton signed the defense bill into law that year, which he had to do, the fire grant program became law. But then Bush comes in. What good's a grant program? There's no money. And Bush's budget in the first year had no money for the fire grant program. So I called the White House. I said, send me down the budget director, Mitch Daniels. So Mitch Daniels came down to my office. He knew, his staff told him I had set him up. I had about 60 members of Congress stuffed in my office. And he came in carried a portable fire extinguisher into my office with him. He said, I think I'm going to need this. I said, you are going to need it, Mitch. I said, we passed this law. It's a grant program for fire departments across the country, and you haven't funded it. He said, we're not funding any new programs. I said, oh, yes, you are, Mitch. You're going to fund these programs for these firefighters across the nation. You're funding $4 billion for police. That year, that was 2001, before 9/11. We got the first $100 million for the fire grant program. A few years later, again, while I was in Congress, 2004, we passed the SAFER program. Those two programs, without the support of either president, have appropriated $18 billion. $18 billion. That's the power of the fire service. That didn't happen because of lobbyists. There was no need for lobbyists. That didn't happen because of the president. It happened because the fire service woke up and they understood that they have the most power of any force in the country when they use it, not to become partisan, not to get in bed with one party or the other, but to get the respect of leaders of both parties and respectfully request their support when issues arise that need their help. And so that's the story. And I'm very proud of the fact that, I did what every firefighter would do if they were in the same situation. It wasn't unusual. I just did what everybody else would have done.
Yep. And when I heard you told us that story the first time before we kind of had those technical issues, and I enjoyed that story then, and I enjoyed it even more today. And I'm grateful, as every firefighter should be grateful for the work that you've done and the legacy that you left. We still need to fight each year to protect the funding for AFG and SAFER. And I'm sure that there's not a department of this country that hasn't been benefited from that program. So we're truly grateful for your work on that. And before we get on to the next topic, something you told me off the air before we started, and I want to make sure our listeners and our followers don't think that the shirt that you're wearing is something you ordered out of a mail catalog. So if you take a minute to talk about the shirt that you're wearing today and how personal it is to you and who gave that to you and why.
I only wear this shirt on special occasions. And that's because in 1993, when the World Trade Center was first attacked, I had been working with the fire department of New York and knew them. And I got a call from the fire commissioner's office. It was Howard Safer. And I'd spoken up at the New York Fire Chiefs Conference, I think earlier that year. And he said, can you come up and meet with our people? So I went up to New York City and they sent me down to the tower that had been attacked, the garage. And they sent me down with agents from our federal government. I think it was DEA and FBI. And they assigned a young New York fire officer to take me through, who became a good friend of mine. And he took me through the garage. He told me his life story, father of 5 kids. He was a former Marine. His name was Ray Downey. And so Ray took me through the garage and showed me what had happened and said, it could have been a lot worse, Congressman. Could have been a lot more death. Could have been a lot more destruction. We've got to prevent this from happening again. I said, Ray, I'm with you all the way. I said, I don't know big cities. I'm not from a big city. You tell me what you need and I'll do it. So he told me the suggestions initially. Interoperable communications was a big problem. They did not have it in New York at the Trade Center. They could not communicate with each other from the Port Authority to the police, to the fire, different frequencies, different high band, low band, digital analog, and that was a big issue. The second was lack of pre-intelligence support about emerging terrorist threats. So I went back that night to Washington, and we had session. This was a day we were going to have session the next day. So I went down to Washington to stay that night. And back then I was sleeping in my office. So I didn't have the money to buy a place. So I would roll out a blow-up bed on the house floor, on my office floor, like other members did, and sleep there and go down to the gym and take a shower in the morning. But it was 11 o'clock at night and the phone rang. And I answered the phone. And the guy on the other end says, is this Congressman Curt Weldon? I said, yes. He said, I just watched your 1 hour special order. I said, oh, okay. Well, how was it? He said, I want to thank you. I said, okay, who are you? He said, I'm Mario Cuomo. I'm the governor of New York. I said, oh, yeah, cut me a break. I said, and I'm howdy doody. He said, Congressman Weldon, I am Mario Cuomo. I'm working in my Albany office tonight, and I had the TV set to C-SPAN, and I listened to your special order about coming to New York today and working with our people to help us prepare to prevent another attack. I said, well, it's an honor to talk to you, Governor, and my commitment is real, and I will work with your firefighters. Well, that began a process with Ray Downey and I that led to me introducing legislation to create the Gilmore Commission. Ray Downey gave me this shirt, New York Fire Department. Has my name on it. I'm very proud of that. Has the fire department seal on it. I don't wear this out in the public. I don't wear this. I wore it a couple times. I'll tell you when I wore it. When I took a delegation in North Korea, the first American delegation to go to North Korea and to meet with the North Korean leaders to show them what America is all about, I wore this coat because they were taking us to the university named after Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korea, and the son. And they expected us to show our pride. I said, well, I'm very proud, happy to be here and see the leadership of your country, but I'm also proud. I said, you see the coat I'm wearing? I said, this is from the Fire Department of New York, and there are heroes in America. And I wear the coat when I do special fire events, podcasts, but I thought with your show, you know, when I was growing up in the firehouse, Fire Engineering and Fire Chief were the two major magazines of my day. And so I read them all the time. In fact, I had a couple of articles in both, which I'm proud of. And so I thought I'd wear it on this show as a tribute to Ray and the firefighters of New York.
Well, I'm sure his sons and his family appreciate that. And, you know, each year at FDIC, that we give out the Courage and Valor Award in honor of Ray Downey for what he's done for the fire service community and the fire engineering family. So I know, you know, Editor-in-Chief now, David Rhodes, will be very proud to know that we have you on the show tonight, that you were a keynoter at FDIC way back in the day in Memphis, where you didn't have weeks to plan or prepare. You just kind of thrust it onto that stage to give that keynoter, and you still remember.
I had slides. I had my slides.
So
I got through it. Big Ed McCormick wouldn't let me not get. Did you know Big Ed McCormick?
I did not, sir.
He was the leader, as you know, the Godfather,
Yep.
back in the days of Memphis at the FDIC.
Yeah, that was I'd like to say a few years before my time, but many more than a few years before my time.
Now, don't make me feel old, or I'll have to get angry here.
All right, I won't do that. I won't tell you. So, Congressman, so when we talked last time, you know, we started discussing the fire service of today and the threats that are to us, firefighters, to our volunteer departments, to our career departments, but just to firefighters and the fire service as a whole. And you have some really big opinions on those threats. But more importantly, you have some ideas of how we can impact those positively and what you feel that we should be doing at the much higher level, at the legislative and the congressional level, to help us overcome those threats. So for our followers, for our elected leaders, for the leaders of the IAFF that I hope will watch this, the IFC, and all these other great organizations that work very hard for us, what message do you have to them, to the threats today, and what do you think they should be doing to help us not overcome the fire service threats of today, but also of tomorrow?
Well, there's two things I would say. First of all, the fire service needs to understand its power. Last year, I gave the keynote speech to the California Chiefs out in L.A. There were about 600 of them there, and this is what I said to them. Stop sucking up to the political parties. I said the political parties' popularity in America, both parties are around 45%. Depending upon the candidate, it's higher. I said police are around 50%. Some people want to defund the police. I don't, but some people do. Military is about the same. Firefighters and EMS in every city, in every county, in every state are 98% supported. Understand that the fire service is the power. You don't understand the power you have. And my message as I traveled to all 50 states speaking at FDIC, at the Chiefs Conference, NFPA, the Volunteer Conference, and all the state conferences was the same. You have to tell your story. And it's not just about, getting a politician to come in. You have to make it real for them. When I was in Congress, I took members of Congress out for ride-alongs. I had members of Congress for the D.C. Fire Department under Ray Alford ride the trucks for a night to see what firefighters go through, to see the experience, talk to them. Every fire department ought to have an opportunity to bring their elected officials in, not just for the photo op. Let them see the kind of things you're undertaking, the things you're involved with. Let them see the trauma you're dealing with. Let them ride. If you have an ambulance or a paramedic unit, let them ride with it for a couple of calls. Let them see what you're going through. They need to understand because they don't get it otherwise. They don't, back when I went to Congress, a lot of the members thought the firefighters were the people that sit in the back of the station and drink beer. They didn't know who they were. And so I had to make it real for them. I had to make them understand that firefighters are the heart and soul of the country and the backbone of the community. And they represent the best. It's not just the people put out fires. I mean, it's where you vote on election day. It's the hall you rent when the young couple wants to have a wedding reception or you want to have a retirement party. It's where the Boy Scout and Girl Scout troops meet. It's the group that you call when the cat's in the tree or when the cellar needs to be pumped out, or when you've got to organize a search party. It's the group that organizes the July 4th parades, the Memorial Day celebrations. They're the backbone. They're the backbone of every community. 30,000 departments, 50,000 stations. Now, approximately 15 to 20% of them are paid, but many of those paid firefighters used to be volunteers. So you've got to build on that strength you have. And then you've got to tell your story, and sometimes it's not easy. I remember after the Trade Center bombing in '93 and getting the story about interoperable communication, and then I did a hearing on the Murrah building bombing out in Oklahoma City. The fire chief was Chief Mars. So I had Chief Mars testify. I said, "What was your biggest issue, Chief?" He said, "When I got to the scene, Congressman, I couldn't talk to everybody. They were all on different frequencies, high band, low band, digital, analog. We needed one combined system of communication." I went back to my staff. At the time, I was chairman of the Oversight Committee for All Military Research. And I said, "What's the problem here? Why can't firefighters and paramedics talk to each other?" And they said, "Well, it's really the big broadcast industry. They don't want to free up frequency spectrum to give public safety its own frequency spectrum." I said, "Well, that's bullshit." They said, "Well, that's what it is. The Congress passed the law, but it's not being implemented because of lobbyists." I said, "Okay." I put the word out. I said to my friends in the fire service, "I need a few fire trucks on a Wednesday to come to Washington. I want you to come to RFK Stadium down the street from the Capitol. Be there by 11 o'clock. I thought I'd get 30 trucks. 300 fire trucks from all over the East Coast drove up and down 95, came across from Maryland, from Virginia, from New York, from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Ohio. And they parked in RFK Stadium, and I grabbed Steny Hoyer, my co-chair, off the House floor. And Steny's always been a good friend of mine. And he said to me, and these were his exact words, "You crazy bastard, Weldon, what are you doing now?" I said, "You're coming with me, Steny." He said, "Where are we going?" He said, "You're going down the Capitol Street to RFK Stadium. I've got one of your fire department trucks down there. You're going to get up in the front seat. We're going to parade down Capitol Street, and we're going to surround the Capitol building." "For what?" I said, "We're going to solve this problem of interoperable communication." We paraded the trucks down Capitol Street, lined them up along Independence Avenue and Constitution Avenue, and at 12 noon, I gave the signal for the air horns and sirens. Working with Chief Alford, I had placed 2 ladder trucks in the Capitol parking lot with their ladders raised and a flag in between them, and a tractor trailer with a microphone, and a politician can smell a microphone a mile away. As the air horns and sirens went off, all the buildings emptied. All the staff, this is before 9/11, all the staffers running out, the members are running out, running over to see what's going on. They ran, and you can see this in my book, the photos, they ran to the fire trucks, the ladder trucks, and they ran to the platform and jumped up on with Stenny and I. They said, "What are we doing?" We said, "We're demanding an interoperable communication system." Today, that's AT&T FirstNet. That didn't happen because AT&T hired lobbyists for FirstNet. It happened because the fire service demanded that it be respected and acknowledged. And so the most important point is the fire service needs to understand its political power. And it doesn't mean you have to be a Republican or a Democrat. You want to be both, because there are good Democrats and good Republicans, but you need to hold your elected officials accountable. You need to go to a fire station and give an award to the member of Congress or the politician, and when they don't do what you want, then you do a public embarrassment and you embarrass them publicly because they didn't support you. That's okay. That's America. But what are the things you have to ask for? Well, in my experience, and I'm not an expert, but I think I know a little bit about firefighting, I came up with 7 major areas that I feel need to be addressed. The most important thing is, next year, 2026, America will be 250 years old. What a big celebration for our country. They're planning celebrations all over, especially in Philadelphia, my home city. 250 years as a country. But wait a minute. Next year, the fire service will be 290 years old. The first fire department was founded by Ben Franklin in Philadelphia. Some would even say up in Boston. But the one I know is in Philadelphia in 1736, Union Hose, volunteer. 40 years before America was a nation. It didn't take a government to form a fire company. It didn't take a bureaucracy to tell people to come together. Men and women joined together to form volunteer organizations to protect their towns. And that happened all over America, in farmlands, in cities, in towns and villages. And next year we celebrate that. So in honor of our 290th anniversary, I want the president, Donald Trump, to hold the first ever in history White House conference on firefighters and EMS. We've had White House conferences on everything under the sun, but never a conference on firefighters and EMS. And I want that conference on firefighters and EMS. I want the president to honor them. And I have total respect for this president, and I'm convinced he will do it. I've been briefing his staff. And here's what I want him to do. I want him to appoint 7 task forces. These are presidential task forces. These are not congressional commissions. They get bogged down in bureaucracy. These are not staff agencies. These are presidential commissions. The first task force, presidential task force, is on firefighter health, safety, and welfare. Now, why is that important? This is a top priority of the union. And Ed Kelly's doing a great job as head of the IAFF. He's a good friend of mine. I'm an honorary member of the union for life. And that's their big issue. They work it all the time. Cancer, hepatitis C, burns, all those important. But here's what they're missing. You can't get more research for those issues from the NIH. The biggest funder of healthcare research in America is not the NIH. It's the Department of Defense, because our defense budget's so large. So you've got to have the president say, we want to give the firefighters all the research available on their priorities, health-wise, and we want to include all those defense research centers that can assist them in that. Down in Maryland, we have Fort Detrick. The whole fort is nothing but research on healthcare. Why should it just be for the military? It should also be for firefighters and EMS, but that's not going to happen unless you get that focus from the president. So the first task force is on firefighter health and safety from the president. The second task force deals with the biggest problem we have in the country. We're not building a new generation of firefighters. We've allowed cell phones and internet to take our young people away from what was a big thing when I was a kid, growing up in a fire family. We need to start in the schools. So I went to the Rendell Center. The Rendell Center for Civic Engagement in Philadelphia was started by Mayor Governor Ed Rendell of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, who was the chairman of the Democrat National Party. Do you get my bipartisanship? Chairman of the Democrat National Party. Ed Rendell formed a nonprofit with his wife, Midge. She's a current federal judge. They have established an outstanding nonprofit called the Rendell Center for Civic Engagement. And I went to them and I said, you've been in existence for over 10 years, getting kids involved in our government. can you do something for firefighters and EMS? They said, absolutely. They developed a curriculum, a program. It's done for public, parochial, and private schools, not on fire prevention. Fire companies do that on how to get kids intrigued, involved, and want to be a part of the fire service. So we develop a new generation from kindergarten to 12th grade, the new generation of firefighters. And then they brought in a high school teacher, firefighter, deputy fire chief, Ellen Yarborough, who developed a program called From Schoolhouse to Firehouse. And she takes 10th graders, 11th and 12th graders, and gets them involved in local fires. So we have a program from kindergarten to 12th grade, getting kids involved in the fire service. So we're building a new generation of firefighters. Now, there are some states doing great jobs with cadet programs, scout programs, and I want to have all of them as a part of this. But the Rendell Center will be the lead to make sure we're doing this program to get as many young people involved in celebrating the future as volunteer firefighters, volunteer paramedics, or eventually going into the paid operational fire EMS community. The third task force. It's great to get young people involved, but what about the current need? We can't wait for those kids. So how do we get young people involved that are today married or getting married? Well, we do what we do with our military. Last year, I went down twice and had lunch with Admiral Tom Lynch. He's all over the news media with his ads for New Day. Tom Lynch is the CEO of New Day. He's a great guy. He used to be the head of Annapolis. New Day runs mortgage programs for veterans. They give discounted mortgages for veterans. They give no down payments for veterans, for mortgages. So does USAA. Well, why don't we have a program for firefighters and EMS? Why don't we give benefits from the private sector to people who want to serve their community as volunteers or as paid firefighters? So that program I've named Responder Lifeline. And the third task force will identify CEOs who want to offer private sector benefits, whether it's discounts at a department store or discounted mobile phone rates or discounted mortgages or bank rates, whatever it is. But if you join a fire company, you qualify for all these benefits because we recognize what you're doing. That's the third task force. The fourth task force is on technology. You know, it's frustrating to me. I chaired for 6 years, the Oversight Committee for All Research for the Pentagon. That was back then about $150 billion a year. All great technology for our soldiers. And I support it all. I'm a big supporter of the military. Support it all. But I can't tell you my outrage when in 2000, 6 firefighters from Worcester, Massachusetts died in a fire. 2 firefighters were sent into a burning warehouse. You remember the story. Their air supply ran out. The chief sent 4 more firefighters in. All 6 died. At that very time, I knew, as a chairman of the research committee, that the military had already perfected vertical and horizontal GPS and the transmitter for the vital signs. And so I said, why don't we have a system where a firefighter is assigned a device, a simple device to wear, that gives you their GPS location and their vital signs. So the chief knows where they are and how well they're doing wherever they are in the building, on the fire ground, or in the forest for a wildland. 25 years later, we still don't have that technology. That's outrageous. That is absolutely outrageous.
Yep. Horrible that we have not figured that out when you and I both know that the military has, but we don't have that technology available to our first responders today.
Exactly right. And that's what I'm saying. The fire service gets so wrapped up in we're dealing with FEMA, homeless. Forget them. They don't have the power to give you what you need. And if you're going to deal with FEMA and Homeland Security, they're small mini agencies. I was the vice chairman of the Defense Committee, overseeing the entire military budget. I was chairman of the oversight budget for research. I know the money. We've got to build the base. And I've already been in outreach with one of the people that I don't want to name the person, is going to be in a very senior position in the new administration for our military. That's where the focus needs to be on technology. Let me give you another example. Right now, we're fighting forest fires. I was out in California in the 90s with Elton Gallagher. He was the mayor of Simi Valley and a congressman. I went out there because the Simi Valley fires were very bad. Back then, we had no military cooperation with firefighters. So Elton and I was on the committee. He wasn't. I got the Pentagon to assign the first C-130s to be used to support the California Fire Service. Now, that has improved, but not to the extent it should be. We are not giving the full support for wildland and forest fire protection from the standpoint of our military hardware that we could be giving it, and that's got to change. Also, I was aware that our satellites, because I was the point person on missile defense, we detect missile launches any place in the world by the heat given off from the rocket engine. So I said to the people running the program, then you can see a fire. They said, Congressman Weldon, we can see a fire the size of a one acre area. I said, then you can see a field fire. Absolutely. Any place in the world. It took us 15 years to finally use satellites to help us support wildland fire protection. But today, we have an algorithm that can give us the moisture content of a forest or a wildland any place in America in advance of a fire. Why isn't that being used? So we can tell a community in advance of any fire what the moisture content is of a wildland area in advance, whether it's Montana and I've been to the forest fires in all those states. There are tools we have in technology that are not being used. Augmented reality. I've been working with a Princeton company. That's augmented reality. The same thing our pilots use in our planes. So I said, you got to develop a software system for our paramedics. Well, what do you want to do? I said, and here's what we have now, today. They can put the glasses on when they leave the fire station. They can see normal, just like a pilot sees in a plane. The hospital can download the patient data into the glasses. So while they're driving to the scene of the patient or the accident, if they know who it is, they can download the patient data. If they know the type of trauma, they can download the trauma situation. When they get to the scene, there's a thermometer on the front. They can read the body temperature 10 feet away, which we did during COVID. But more importantly, when the paramedic gets to the victim, whether it's in a house or on an accident, the doctor sitting back in a trauma center 1,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away can see and hear in real time everything the paramedic is saying to the patient and can talk to both the patient and the paramedic through the glasses. Why isn't that being used by all of our EMS people today? And it's all HIPAA compliant. It's all HIPAA compliant. The problem is the fire service doesn't understand the potential of what they've already paid for with taxpayer money. So technology is the fourth biggest initiative.
And our military does that. We have people in command centers all over the country watching what our military officers are doing on the front lines each and every day. We know that technology exists, and it's another example that the fire service gets the crumbs that are left over where we need to be up front and at the table getting this technology up front. And that's going to change. That's going to change when you get a presidential task force from the top down, the president. And we appreciate what you're doing. I'm just going to stop your roll for a quick second and just reach out to Mark running the show behind the curtain for us. Mark, if you can let Frank Ricci into the show, he's in the studio waiting. He's been able to join us. So Frank, thank you for joining us. And we are, talking with the congressman, and he's talking about his 7 task force that he's recommending to help the fire service fight the fight to get to where we need to be. And he just finished up number 4 with technology. So, Frank, welcome for joining us. And we'll let the congressman go on, and please jump in when you can.
PJ, it's an honor to be on. I apologize. Having the congressman on is just phenomenal. I had a rare opportunity today at the last minute. I got asked to give a legal briefing to the entire Daily Caller reporting and editorial staff. And I was joined today by Mike Pence's chief legal counsel and the Heritage Foundation's John Carlo, and we gave a joint presentation. So I apologize, Congressman, but it was an opportunity I couldn't put off. It's not every day somebody from a state think tank gets invited in to give one of these briefings. So
I got upstaged by the media. It's okay. Well, I'm not going to hold that against you. I'm only teasing you. That was a good thing you did that. We need more of that, as I've explained about the need to tell the story. The 5th task force is relevant. It's basically natural disasters. I call it the Wildfire Natural Disaster Task Force. I was out in California last year. I've been on wildfires in Simi Valley, up in the northern part of the state, in Montana, Oregon, Colorado. I was on all of them firsthand. And we don't understand. And here's the problem. and this is a problem in California, we've allowed career bureaucrats in the Department of Interior and in our Forestry Service who don't understand firefighting to make decisions that impact the firefighter's ability to deal with what you're seeing down in LA County. Now, I'm a conservationist. When I taught school, I was an environmental educator for 2 years. I wrote a curriculum for that. So I'm not some rabid person that's anti-environment, but I'm not a person that's going to allow a left-wing liberal environmentalist do detrimental damage to firefighters when they try to tell us how they're going to have to control these conflagrations once they get started. Kim Zagaris, one of the lead wildfire guys in California, is a good friend of mine. And he attended a conference the White House had last fall, and it was dominated by bureaucrats. I don't want conferences dominated by bureaucrats. This Wildfire Natural Disaster Task Force, announced by the president, will be run by firefighter professionals. Yeah, we'll have the input from Interior, the input from the Park Service, the input from the agencies, but the Fire Service will determine what their needs are and how to best deal with water supply, how to deal with vegetation, how to deal with the kinds of issues like use of satellites that benefit them in their job. And that not just doesn't apply to forest fires, that applies to floods, to earthquakes. You know, when I saw the wildland fires in California, they were looking and trying to find ways to predict where the winds were going to shift. I said, wait a minute, you have Lawrence Livermore Laboratory out here. I used to oversee the funding for them. I said, they developed software programs in case of a nuclear meltdown that can track the plumes of the radioactivity based on the prevailing winds. It's the same travel. Why aren't using that software for the travel of the wildland fire? They never knew about it. We need to open up our government so that the fire service is not locked in this little cubicle of FEMA and Homeland Security, but rather gets the broad capabilities of all of our agencies, especially DOD and intelligence, that can be used to change the paradigm. And I've given you some examples. I have about 20 examples of technologies. And that's why the people I have involved with this are Dr. Tony Tether, the longest serving director of DARPA, Admiral Jay Cohen, the former head of Naval Research, former head of Homeland Security Technology, who's a top technology guy, Chuck Brooks, the number one cybersecurity guy in the country. These are all people who understand technology. But there's two more technologies that I'm going to talk about that the fire service and EMS has no clue. In 1997, I did a hearing on asymmetric threats because I was chairman of the research committee. And I said, in the next century, there are going to be threats that we face far greater than tanks and planes and ships. The first one is drones. No one was using drones back then. My committee started the funding. Drones are all over the place now. The fire service has not been properly briefed on drones, both offensive and defensive. And that's got to take place right away. We saw that up in the New York area recently, and I spoke out about it. The second is cyber. Cybersecurity is a number one issue, so the fire service systems do not get compromised during the course of their work and their activities. That's a major priority, and we have the capability to support them in that. The third, EMP. Fire and EMS has no clue what EMP is. The U.S. did the first test in 1963. If you Google the word Starfish Prime, we set off a nuclear weapon over Japan and fried all the electronic components on the island. Today, Russia, China, the U.S., and other nations are mastering EMP, the use of electromagnetic pulse, directed energy weapons that can take out a building or an operation. And the fire service and the EMS community needs to understand the potential impact that could have on disaster situations they face. Today, the fire service doesn't have a clue. And the fourth one's the big one. And our government doesn't want to talk about it. And that's why I'm going to tell you about it. And that's called cognitive warfare. Mark my word. Cognitive warfare. It's more commonly known in the media as Savannah Syndrome. We've had employees in our embassies who become sickened by attacks on their brains. The U.S. won't admit it, but we've been doing research in that area. The Chinese have been doing research in that area. The use of wave patterns impact people's thoughts. Now, fire and EMS are the emergency responders for our country at home. Fire and EMS are our domestic defenders. They don't need to live in a cocoon need to be briefed on what the emerging threats are. So in case they face them, they can deal with them. And these 4 asymmetric threats need to be briefed to the fire service. That's the 5th task force, technology. The 6th task force is my big pet. I go to Washington, D.C., as I did for 20 years, and I've seen hundreds of memorials and monuments for for soldiers. I can go to the Pentagon and get a tour. I can go to the military bases. I can get tours. The military celebrated all over. The police, I can go to the FBI building and get a tour of the FBI building, or go to the FBI, the Law Enforcement Memorial. Do you know there's nothing in Washington? Nothing for the firefighter? Nothing. Zero. Nada. You got to go to Emmitsburg. And that's to celebrate fallen firefighters. I do that. I've done that 5 times. But I want to celebrate those that are alive. Or you can go out to Colorado to the paid firefighters memorial. What about the firefighters that are here? Why aren't they being honored? There is nothing in Washington today. Nothing. So I got control of the property that's closest to the Capitol on New Jersey Avenue across from the Hyatt Regency, including an overtop of Engine 3, the oldest fire station in D.C., which was volunteer. Now it's a station that protects all of Capitol Hill. The city of D.C. has been working with me for 5 years. I've got investors lined up. We're going to tear down the liquor store, and we're going to build a 13-story legacy fire EMS tower. It's going to have 4 stories of museum.
We're going to tear down a liquor store?
We're going to tear down a liquor store. We're going to tear down a liquor store. We have beer in the back for the firefighters to enjoy some fun, but we're tearing down the liquor store. That 4-story museum is going to be the history of the fire service. Wow. So, and there's plenty of good museums around, but they're city museums or state. There's no national. I want a national museum. That's the first 4 floors. And then we're going to put a studio in there. My good friend Martin Gruby, a retired firefighter from Virginia, started Fire EMS Rescue TV, 4 channels. Whether it's Martin's company or whatever, but I've told Martin I'm building a studio in that building. We're going to have a studio, and that's going to provide an interconnected 4-channel network into all 50,000 fire stations for free. The first communication network for fire departments in the fire station. 1 channel for training, 1 channel for updates on disasters, 1 channel for marketing products and services, and the 4th channel for the local chief to use. That will be broadcast from that building. And you know what? Members of Congress who want to do press events today, they've got to go uptown or go up to the Hall of States and they can all go to the fire building to do their press conferences. What a great magnet that is for us. So that tower is going to be built at the intersection across from the Hyatt Regency, over top of Engine 3. And the people that own the hotel next to it, called the Yotel, they want to combine the hotel in so it'll be an entire block. It'll be the fire block of America, honoring fire, EMS, and disaster response.
Congressman, do you have appropriations for that project yet?
It's privately funded. It's privately funded.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yep. When I went to the architect of the Capitol to brief the architect 4 years ago, and I took Judge Sullivan with me. I rolled out the plans. He said to me, because when you build so close to the Capitol, you have to at least, even though it's not federal property, it's like a block away, you have to get the architect approval to do it. He said, Congressman, why hasn't someone done this before? I said, how do I know? He said, well, maybe we ought to extend the federal property 1 more block and just incorporate it. I said, no, I don't want this owned by the federal government. I want this to be a firefighter building. You see, I'm not for the government controlling everything, as you can tell, because I know what the government does. I want these things controlled by the fire service. So that fire tower will only be controlled by firefighters and fire service organizations. And I've briefed many of the fire organizations, and the funding for all these activities, I've been funding it myself. But I'm working with investors, and I've got several ready to go. I've got lawyers in place. The plans are all done for the building. I can send them to you. It'll blow you away when you see the plans. It'll make you tear up, because we're going to surround that building and that hotel with red bricks. And those red bricks are going to be from small donations from every fire department in the country. And they're going to line the region around that entire block. So when somebody goes to Washington all of a sudden, they're now going to honor and celebrate the American Fire Service. We haven't had that for the 289 years of our country's history. The last task force number 7, is a task force to build an international fire EMS training and simulation center. There is none. Now, I've been to the Fire Academy. I know what it's like. I've spoken there. I helped fund it. That's not what I'm talking about. I taught. I got my state certification from the State Fire Academy in Lewistown, Pennsylvania. I've taught classes at Delaware State Fire School. I've been to MIFRE at Maryland. I've been to Texas A&M with the Texas folks who are good friends of mine. Oklahoma. I know them all. There's no national center. I want a national fire EMS disaster training and simulation center, not just to do evolutions, but to do all types of training and simulation. I want a full simulation of a collapse. I want a full simulation of a flood. I want a full so I have a donor who has offered to me 120,000 acres of land in Southern California. I briefed quietly the Cal chiefs. I said, will you help put this together and plan it? And they said, absolutely. So what I want to do is get the president to announce a task force to study and plan an international center led by America. But we want to bring over as many of the 25 million firefighters and EMS from around the world as we can to train them on the techniques that we use. And then we want to do through AI and through augmented reality, uplinks and downlinks, so we can train them. What this does is it builds a new image of America. We're not the dominant power taking over their economy. We're the country offering to help them with their disasters. And I don't care what country it is. They all have disasters. Remember, firefighters and EMS are not driven by power nor money. They're not the money-sucking politicians or the money-grabbing people, the lobbyists that want to take. Firefighters and EMS do what they do because they love it. It's a part of their blood. That center can become the center for the world's response to fire, EMS, disasters, floods, earthquakes, tsunamis, everything you think of. Then there's one more thing I want the president to do. I want him to name those 7 task forces. Separately from all of that, I want him to name a new 9/11 commission. We owe it to our colleagues, the 343 from New York, including Ray Downey, the truth. We don't have the truth, folks. I know. I know the cover-up. I know what the 9/11 Commission did not include. I did a podcast on this myself on 9/11, which you can watch. I can show you the book. Not me. This book, published about our commanding general of our special forces on horseback, General Keith Lambert. I never met the man. He was responsible for overseeing all of our special forces on horseback, primarily in Asia. And in this book, and this was made a movie, by the way, New York Times bestseller. In the book on page 27, I want you to read what he said when he was asked about 9/11. The writer said to him, General, what was your response when 9/11 happened? And this is what General Lambert said. Within seconds, I knew who had done the attack, and I knew it involved Muhammad Atta, because I had been briefed on a top-secret Army intelligence program. That program is Able Danger. I was funding it. None of that's in the 9/11 Commission report. None of it. None of it. When I brought all this out publicly, Louis Freeh, former FBI director who had left office in 2000, wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. You can Google it and get it. Called An Unfinished Investigation. He went on Good Morning America. I can give you the copy of the interview. And he said, if I would have had the information that Congressman Weldon has now shown was available, we could have prevented 9/11 from happening. I'm not going to sit back, folks, and you can't either. If you're a true firefighter, you can't sit back while Ray Downey and 343 firefighters died and let some bureaucrat, pencil pusher, cover up what he or she didn't do that could have prevented that. We can't let that happen. If they take every breath out of my body, we can't let that happen. And I'm not going to let it happen. It's not a conspiracy theory. General Lambert's not a conspiracy theorist. And neither is Colonel Tony Schaefer. They ruined his career because he told the story of what the Able Danger team found 1 year before 9/11. Now, 9/11's 20 years ago. I brought Ray Downey's widow and 5 kids to my district 1 month after, and I honored them with 50,000 people in a parade. It's not enough to do parades. It's not enough to donate money for housing, for firefighters that have died. That's not enough. The truth is the only thing that will satisfy. And all of us who are devoted to fire and EMS know that message well. If a firefighter dies, we want their family to know that we've done everything possible to make sure no other firefighter dies the same way. That's the 8th task force that I want Donald Trump to name. Thank you.
So, Congressman, if you had just 60 seconds on what you're asking President Donald Trump to do, what would that be? Go ahead.
I've never met Donald Trump, but I have the highest respect for the man. He's the only man in America today that could undertake the task of giving us what needs to be done for the fire service. A White House conference on firefighters and EMS, 7 task forces on the primary needs of the fire service in the 21st century, and a new task force to review the 9/11 most horrific act in the history of our country.
Very well said. And we're really hoping you get that audience with President Trump, and being in Congress for over 20 years and with the respect and all of the different fire department organizations who have all too often failed firefighters. You're held in high esteem by everyone. So I'm really hoping and pushing for you to make that, to get that time with the president.
I'm just a firefighter. That's all I am. I'm no better, no worse. I learned every lesson in life from firefighters. My father was much smarter than me and never went to high school. He had common sense and moral decency. Every firefighter has common sense and moral decency. We cannot let PhD, pencil-pushing bureaucrats push the fire service around like we're a bunch of minions. That's not going to happen.
Well, remember, this great nation was founded by firefighters, and the fire hall was only second to the church and the tavern in developing this great nation that we have today.
Remember, 40 years before America was formed, the first fire department was started in 1736 by Ben Franklin in Philadelphia, Union Hose, and it was a volunteer fire company. It didn't take a bureaucracy. It didn't take an organization. It didn't take a Congress to organize the fire service. People came together, men and women, to protect each other. That became the volunteer fire company. Today, we have 30,000 departments. We have 50,000 stations. 85% of them are volunteer. 501c3s raise their own money, set their own standards. They're the heart and soul of the community. They're the backbone of the community and the nation. Our job is to make sure that we give them all the respect they deserve. You know, what really gets me angry is we just went through a time period where we spent hundreds of billions of dollars on illegal immigrants in our country for benefits and housing, and we can't take care of firefighters and EMS and teachers. I mean, the backbone of our country. I mean, cut me a break.
I cannot agree more, and I would just throw veterans in there. We have veterans that but just no reason for it.
No, and the same thing with veterans having to beg for services. I mean, these are the people that gave up their lives. And, you know, and that's one of my big bugaboos that got me in trouble was I know what happened after 9/11. I don't want to talk about it on your show because it will not sit well with people. But when the true story comes out about what happened after 9/11, and you'll be sick to your stomach. And I don't want to get into that, but it doesn't involve firefighters per se, it involves veterans. But
well, Congressman, you always have a place on politics and tactics. Again, from the bottom of my heart, I apologize. I'm being here late today. It was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. And
no problem, Frank. And remember, there are great Democrats and great Republicans. I mean, I'm a Republican. When I was elected mayor, I was nominated by both parties, but I was on a Democrat ticket and a Republican ticket. My best friends in Congress were largely all Democrats, so I'm not a partisan. I mean, and when I started the Fire Caucus, I mandated it could not be controlled by one party. We rotate the chairmanship back and forth from both party into both houses. But I can tell you right now, there are some scumbags behind the scenes and I hate to get into them, but they're not out for the best interests of America, and I'm not for them, and they're in both parties. I mean, I'm a very strong critic of Dick Cheney, and I'm a very strong critic of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and I serve with all three of them. But I'm not going to go into that on your show.
Absolutely. Well, the fire service should transcend politics, and I think your
That's right.
career exemplifies that. Hopefully, if you don't mind, I could talk to you offline. I got a couple pieces coming out in the Daily Caller and the American Spectator, and I might want to quote you in it and maybe talk about some of the things you're trying to get done. Anything I can do to amplify your voice from this small side of the aisle, I would love to help you out.
Thanks for your great work.
And PJ, thank you so much for your grace and guidance and getting this off the road. Mark, if you could take us off. And again, thanks everybody at Politics.
By the way, here's one more thing I should point you out. You should know this.
Go ahead.
Last May, I was approached by a very prominent Democrat Congresswoman, Jill Long from Indiana. And she asked me if I would author one chapter in her book, which is published by Indiana Press, called Across the Aisle: How Bipartisanship Should Work for America. So I said, sure, Joe, I'll be glad to do it. I was one of like 12 people she asked, which I felt honored. This book is written by 12 Democrat and Republican members out of thousands about how we can work together. My chapter is on public safety, how public safety should be a bipartisan issue. So you can read that chapter in this book, Indiana Press. Jill Long is the author. I wrote one chapter in it, and it shows this is not a partisan battle. This is not about conservatives, liberals. It's a republic. It's about people that care about America. There are bad actors in both parties. We have to transcend above that. Get back to what the country's all about.
Well, Mark Ha does a great job from Fire Engineering, and I'll be able to get a list of links that you mentioned on this show, so we can have Mark post it right underneath the show.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right, take us off, and another great night of politics and tactics. And thank PJ Norwood and our great guest, Curt Weldon, Congressman from the great state of Pennsylvania for over 20 years, and the very individual who started the Fire Caucus. So thank you, Congressman. It's an honor to have you on.